What's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of Beyond UX Design. I'm Jeremy. If you're new here, welcome to the show. I am super stoked to have you. And if you haven't done it already, please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you are regular here and you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would really appreciate you leaving a 5-star review. That'll help me out so much more than you can imagine. And as always, thanks so much to Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Roddy, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, and Kevin for all their support. And if you want to join those fine folks and help keep the show independent and ad-free, you can become a patron for as little as $3 a month. That's less than $1 an episode. And if you do that, you'll get some sweet, sweet perks for your support. And of course, if you think the show is worth sharing, then I would love it if you told some friends. And for more information on how you can support the show and help more people find out about what we're doing here, make sure to check out beyonduxdesign.com/support. So a few weeks back, I was scrolling through LinkedIn as I am wont to do, and I came across a post by Danielle Barnes that just really kind of shook me a little bit. And it was this idea that, biases and stuff, we think about them keeping you from, all kinds of stuff like career progression or raises or even getting a job to begin with. But there's it even goes deeper than that. And there's this idea that, it might even just keep you from just being full of self-doubt, and you might call it imposter syndrome or anything else. But it's just so it's insidious, and it just gets down, and it's a dirty, dirty thing. But it's one of those things where biases can really, if we understand them and we are aware of them, I think we have an opportunity to mitigate a lot of their effects. So I'm really excited to have Danielle on the show today to talk about her program and her book and all this other stuff that she's got going on. I'm really excited to have Danielle on. Danielle is the CEO of Women Talk Design, where she's on a mission to amplify the voices of women and non-binary folks. She's trained hundreds of individuals on the power of storytelling and how to become a more confident public speaker. She co-founded Austin Design Week, a week-long event celebrating the design community in Austin through over 100 free community-hosted talks, workshops, and events that ran from 2016 to 2021. And previously, Danielle founded and led the education company General Assembly's Austin campus, launched a San Francisco campus, and championed the first full-time user experience design immersive program, which is out in March 2024. Danielle, welcome to Beyond UX Design. I am so excited to have you on. How's it going?
Thanks, Jeremy. I am very happy to be here. Happy that my dog is being silent for a couple minutes as we start recording.
Oh, it's all good. Yeah, she must be psychic. She knows what's up.
Yeah.
No, that's great. The dog doesn't bother me at all. I don't know. If anybody out there hates dogs, they shouldn't be listening to the show to begin with. I'm just kidding. If you like dogs, you hate dogs, I'd love to have you. So Danielle, like I said, I found you. I came across dogs are welcome. I came across you on LinkedIn randomly. I don't even remember. Somebody that I follow probably liked something that you had posted, and it's one of those things. Like, I post about biases and stuff every week, and it's something I feel like we really need to be more aware of. But there's these institutional biases, these systemic biases, even non-systemic, which is people being jerks and harassing people and stuff. And you do such important work with Women Talk Design and all the stuff you've been doing. So I'm so excited to have you on and talk about that. Before we do that, tell us a little bit about you and your background. I know I read that little bio, but you've got more depth than that, I'm sure. Tell us a little bit about you and how'd you get to start talking about these things?
Yeah, I mean, you did a great job sharing my bio, so thank you.
I just read what you wrote.
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, I spent the past 6 years working with Women Talk Design, and it was actually founded by Christina Woodkey, who's a designer, a leader in the design industry. She is currently a lecturer at Stanford, and she founded Women Talk Design in 2013. I came on board in 2017 because she was speaking at a lot of design conferences and found that she was often the only woman on stage. And, 2013 was a while ago, but still there were a ton of amazing women who could be speaking. And so Christina decided that she wanted to change that and started a directory of women in design broadly and in product, but mostly digital design. And would add them to a website, set it up as a directory, and send it to event organizers and say, no more excuse. You should have more diversity on your conference stages. And so that's really where the journey of Women Talk Design started. I came on board and came into this. Christina and I have known each other for years. We worked together at General Assembly. And in 2000, Christina actually ran a GoFundMe campaign to bring on board 2 of her design students when she was teaching, to give them internships and have them actually go through the design process and do research and redesign the website for Women Talk Design. And so Jennifer and Melissa started this project and interviewed conference organizers and interviewed specifically women speakers to figure out, okay, why aren't there more women on stage speaking? And they had some really interesting results from that. They published an article called, I think it's the 7 reasons why women say no to speaking and what conference organizers can do about it. And that was really the start of what led us to where Women Talk Design is today. So around that time, came on board. Christina had, as part of her GoFundMe campaign, promised a public speaking workshop for women. And since her and I worked together at General Assembly, she asked me if I wanted to help her develop it and put it on. And that workshop in 2017 is Present Yourself. It's evolved a lot over the years. It's become a more intensive program. It's now a book. But yeah, that's been a bit of the journey of, how Women Talk Design started and how I came on board. And we've really expanded our mission a lot since then. I'm happy to go into, but that's the gist of it.
Yeah, no, I love that. I'm curious, like the 7 reasons why women weren't speaking. Was it? Can you talk? I'm curious about that. We didn't really plan on talking about it, but it is kind of intriguing. I didn't read the article, but the 7 reasons. I imagine some of them were probably they felt intimidated by the men, but some of them were probably, I imagine, almost like self-censoring, like they just didn't want to put themselves in that situation, or what was the reasons for that?
Yeah, so I don't have the list in front of me, but from what I can remember, one of them, funny enough, is imposter syndrome, which we're going to talk about. And actually, since this article has come out, we haven't published an update to it, but in a lot of the work that we do, we talk about some of the updates to the reasons that we would give based on our ongoing research and conversations with women and non-binary folks in our community. But initially, it was things like imposter syndrome. It was issues like fear of harassment, because there was a lot of knowledge around there being harassment towards women at conferences, overscheduling, being busy with other commitments, not wanting to be the token woman, like sometimes feeling like they're being asked because they're a woman rather than because of their expertise. Some concerns about pay, because a lot of speakers do get paid to speak, and there's a discrepancy between what women and men get paid. And so, when looking at the 7 reasons, one of the things that really stood out to me was that conferences really felt like microcosms for the workplace. It was like, these are all issues we hear about in the workplace. We hear about harassment, we hear about unequal pay, we hear about, trying to struggle with work-life balance and the load there. And so I think those reasons come up when it comes to finding opportunities to speak. As I mentioned, since then, we've revised the list. So instead of imposter syndrome, we now have biases that lead to self-doubt. Also, when it comes to being the token, not just the token woman, but any part of your identity, because we've really tried to think more broadly about who we're supporting. And it's not just woman, that's one part of your identity, but also the intersectionalities that you might have. So not wanting to be the, the token disabled woman, or not wanting to be the token non-binary Black person, right? So, and then finally, I think one of the revisions is that oftentimes they just weren't being asked. So these were all the reasons that they say no, but adding a note of, a lot of the reason that stages haven't been more diverse is because of who's ultimately being asked to be on stage.
You can't say yes if you weren't asked to begin with. So that's actually really fascinating. So something that I think a lot of junior designers, and we talked about a little bit about the post that we found, and the thing that struck me, and I honestly had never really thought of this before, and when I read your post, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I've missed this. But as designers, we always talk about imposter syndrome. Junior designers always talk about imposter syndrome. And your post just made me think so much about this idea that it's self-doubt, but it's not imposter syndrome. It's self-doubt due to the biases and all the institutional things that many people have had to face over the years that have made them feel like they're imposters, even though they really aren't. And I'm curious, you mentioned in your post that you realized that you didn't mention imposter syndrome once in the entire book, but you did speak to the themes. And can you talk a little bit about that? Because I feel like that's such an important thing, especially for junior designers, to kind of understand that these outside forces could be causing them to feel this way.
Yeah. Yeah. First, I want to give credit to Ruchika Tulshan and Jodi Embury, who published an article a couple years ago in Harvard Business Review called Stop Telling Women They Have Imposter Syndrome. And this really helped shape my thinking about this. And one of the things that they talk about is that, imposter syndrome can actually happen to anyone. It's not just specifically women. Like we can feel like we are not qualified to be in a position that we're in. People feel that a lot of people like lack maybe some level of confidence to be where they are. But specifically with women, for years and years, it's been told like we have imposter syndrome and it's like something that we need to fix and it's a women's issue. And, there's specific trainings for women to overcome your imposter syndrome. And so one of the things that Ruchika and Jodi Ann talk about is that that's not fair. And it's not helping solve the issue because we're hands for things or we're starting to doubt ourselves is not just because we're lacking something. It's because of the systems that have told us that, we are not qualified or that when we speak up, our voice sounds shrill and it like makes people uncomfortable or, lots of different reasons. And so, as I mentioned, the list of the 7 things that Melissa and Jennifer found initially, imposter syndrome was listed as one of them. And so imposter syndrome is definitely more in my lexicon. And I think over the years, having more conversations with folks in our community and researching the works of other people, including Jodi Ann and Ruchika, I have reframed that for myself. And when writing Present Yourself, as I mentioned in my post, I didn't even realize I wasn't saying imposter syndrome. The only reason I found it out is because I was trying to eliminate too much repetition of the same words. And so I did Control Find of the manuscript and typed in imposter syndrome to make sure I didn't use it like 10 times. And I realized I hadn't used it at all. And that was
0.
I was like, oh, okay. It was both surprising, but then not because, if you type in bias, I'm sure that's in there many times. And I think that this reframing is helpful because it allows you to realize that you're not alone. It's not like something that's just you. It's something that's happening to other people. It helps you then figure out like how you might navigate the situation. And it's like, okay, I don't need to change and be something different. I need to figure out how I can still be successful within this system while at the same time working to change it and trying to find like advocates and allies to help change it as well, which is I think something we're going to talk about. So
yeah, for sure. No, yeah, we're definitely getting into that. Before we do that, I would love to talk a little bit about your book because I do think that it's a valuable resource for sure, and the program as well. Before we get into all this, tell us a little bit about the book, the Present Yourself book, and the program, and what it is, and what you guys are trying to do.
Yeah, so we just recently confirmed the subhead for the book. It's Proven Strategies for Authentic and Impactful Public Speaking. And so Present Yourself, the program started in 2017. It was a public speaking workshop. And the idea was, how can we bring people together to take an idea that they might have and craft it into a talk in just 2 days and present it and deliver it with confidence. That was, one of our goals from the beginning. Workshop first in San Francisco, then we started to run it in different cities around the US. And then in 2020, as you can imagine, we moved it online. And then the big, I think, milestone that really helped us see that this could be a book was in 2021. We changed it into a hybrid program where there were recorded modules that people can learn on their own time. And then there was a live virtual session where folks could come together and practice speaking. And for those asynchronous modules made us realize like, oh, there's a book here, perhaps.
A book, yeah.
And really the focus of it, there's so much public speaking advice out there. I mean, I'm sure you've read articles or books or maybe even attended a class on public speaking. And there's a lot of great resources. But also we found that there's a lot that doesn't work for a lot of people. I think that a lot of public speaking advice tries to teach people how to quote unquote be a speaker, whatever that means. And I think that's often coded to act like a, successful white cis man who has been seen in leadership in the past. And it just doesn't work for so many of us. And, I feel like we're like told in culture to like be authentic and be yourself, but then we're being told to act a very specific way when it comes to public speaking. And so the goal of the program is to teach a framework that you can use as you're approaching presentations, but also to emphasize that there's no one right way, that your voice needs to be heard, and that it's really important to bring other people into your process because we're so much more successful if we don't go at it alone. So those are core principles in the program and now in the book so that anyone can access them.
Right on. And so by the time this episode comes out, that book may or may not be out already. We'll see. I'm not sure when we're going to release this episode, but
March.
We'll definitely put links in the show notes. Yeah, March in 2024. So yeah, I almost said 2023. But yeah, so we will definitely include all of that in the show notes. So I want everybody to check that out. So I want to talk a little bit more about the biases that we see throughout, not, you mentioned, it's funny because you're talking about events and speaking events, but it's a microcosm for the workplace and life in general. I'm kind of curious, like, if we're talking maybe junior designers who haven't really been around very, very long and haven't experienced some of these things, what are some types of biases that junior designers or career shifters coming into the field might not be aware of that they need to keep an eye out for?
Yeah, I think that people who are coming into the workforce or the workplace into UX are coming from all different backgrounds. And so many of them may have, aspects of their identity that have been minoritized and so have experienced I'm told that I'm aggressive because of the way I talk, or I am like taught to like be nice and be quiet. We have actually a lot of women that we've worked with in our program who are like being told that like women should be seen and not heard. And so I think all that is to say that folks coming in based on how they were raised or the communities that they grew up in, just culture in general, and especially because there's so many more conversations now happening, I think, about equity and bias and things like that. I think folks will be aware of some of those, but as you enter the workforce, there might be others that you encounter, and I think that there's a lot depending on who you are and how you're showing up. So I shared some examples. Like a lot of the times, women's voices are criticized. They're either told that they are speaking in upspeak, so like it sounds like you're asking everything with a question mark at the end, or that we're using vocal fry, so like this lower register, because maybe you've been told that you use upspeak, so you're trying to make your voice lower. And there's often like a lot of criticism toward work that says like you should really stop ending your phrases in a question. Adam Grant actually shared some interesting research on this. He is a organizational psychologist and talked about how when women are doing these different things, like speaking in upspeak or are using what's called more like weak language, like instead of being it's okay with you, he says they're not dumb when they're doing that. It's because when they've acted the opposite way, they've been criticized for that and they haven't been able to get what they want. And so it's this like tricky place to be in, is that if you are acting more assertive, there might be some biases against that. But then also if you are trying to not be as assertive, to not rub people the wrong way, there might be, other consequences that you face from that. It's tricky. And I struggle with talking about all this because I think it's like, okay, I'm in a rock and a hard spot. Like, what am I supposed to do then? And right. I think that's why, for me, it's really important to not try to change who you are, to be aware of these biases and that they exist, and to know, okay, well, if I am getting a certain type of feedback that could, be through that lens, and try to figure out, okay, like what can I do to still have my voice heard, to still find places that I'm comfortable sharing my ideas, to find advocates who can help me be heard, rather than just saying, okay, well, there's a lot of biases that are working against me, I'm just not gonna say anything.
Yeah, well, that's I've heard that advice, and I've heard that advice, and I've read. I don't know if you're familiar with Vanessa Van Edwards' Cues, her book Cues.
No, I'm not. I'll have to check it out.
I got her book right here. I actually did an episode on it a while ago, but she does give a lot of that advice. And one of the things that I'm hearing you say, and I think this is the important distinction, it's not that you should continue to speak with the weak, I don't know, did you say weak language or the meek language maybe is a way to put it, or the up talk at the end. It's that realizing that you're doing it because of the biases, and you're doing it because you're trying to not seem aggressive, or you're trying to seem like the nice little lady who like doesn't want to put a man in her place, or you know what I mean? And it's like speaking more aggressively, not because you have to speak aggressively, but it's to realize that you were not speaking aggressively because you didn't want to come off that way, because you know men are intimidated by it or something. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? Is that the right way to think about it?
Yeah, I think it's this level of awareness that allows you to make more intentional decisions. I think that like you can say, okay, like maybe I don't want to be a very like loud, boisterous speaker because like that's not who I am and that's not what I want to do. But I'm aware that, I am the way I am for XYZ reason, and I can decide what parts I want to, change or adjust or grow or develop, knowing how the world works.
Yeah, and the thing that I struggle with too, and I'm a man, like I can imagine like a minority or a woman having a similar problem being in a corporate environment with a bunch of white men all around a boardroom or something. And I know I struggle with like speaking and stuff. I can't imagine what it's like for other groups. But one of the things that I'm hearing, and this is something I guess I'm very privileged to never have to deal with this, I guess, but it's like one of those things, you're like rocking a hard place, like you said, that speaking that way makes a man think a certain way about you and gives off certain, an impression. But changing it and being more assertive, and it has like sort of the opposite effect, where then they are against you because they are intimidated by you, and you know what I mean? So it's an interesting conundrum, paradox perhaps. Like, how do you deal with that? I don't know. I'm curious, like from your perspective, what is the advice there? Because you don't want to continue to be that way, but then you also screw the men in the room. I don't know what to say.
I think one of the things I want to clarify is it's not just men who perpetuate biases, right? Like I think we all do. A lot of actually, there's been a lot of studies on how like a lot of women have held other women back in the workplace because it's like, oh well, I had to fight to get here, so like I don't. And gosh, I'm struggling with this conversation because it's both so important, but I'm like so afraid that someone's going to listen to it and be like, oh my gosh, I am screwed to go into the workplace, right? Like, up against all of these barriers. And, there's always this question of like, is it worth talking about or not? And I think it is, because I do think that whoever you are, if you're making a career transition and you are older in the workplace, there's ageism exists, right? Like, so that's something that you might come up against, or again, other parts of your identity might come up. And I just feel so strongly that I don't want people to feel like it's just me and there's something that's just wrong with me. And I think that part of it could be in the interview process when you're interviewing places, like paying attention to how you're treated in those processes, who else is in the room that's there, to see, okay, like, am I the only that looks like me, or are there other people here, who have different identities that, I can maybe even talk to and ask them what the culture is like here, truly. Like maybe that's a conversation that I can have. So I don't think that if you're entering into the workplace and you are from, with a background that has been minoritized, that you are just going to have a miserable time all the time because all of these biases exist. I do think that, there's so many people who are working on being aware of them. There are a lot of companies that are trying to really invest in making their cultures more inclusive and, doing different trainings and development for their team members. Yeah, I feel like I'm maybe talking around the answer that you said. But I think part of it is that...
No, it's fine. It's hard. I imagine there's like a balance, and it's always contextual too. It's, understanding. And I think there's a certain level of this to know when there's a bias at play, and when the people doing it are unaware of that bias and would be willing to change if it were brought to their attention, versus this sort of malicious, I don't know what you might call, there's probably a word for this, but that malicious intent when just it's not jerks. Really a bias at that point. It's just a jerk or somebody just who harassment, some misogynist or something. Right. Harassment. And I'm curious, is there maybe this is easier to talk about when you have these two very specific things, but is there something somebody can do in that situation when they are realizing, I'm speaking up in these meetings and no one pays attention to what I'm saying,
Yeah.
And trying to address that without, again, a woman is going to be seen, oh, she's always like being so emotional is what you hear a lot, right? Or, stop being so emotional, just, chill out, or whatever it is that a man might say. I'm curious, what advice might you have for somebody in that situation, especially a junior designer who might not have a lot of clout, not a lot of authority to get their voice heard, because, that's going to be like promotions and raises and things if it's not, they're not noticed for these things, right?
Yeah, I think being able to find advocates in the workplace is so important. And, if you're starting a job, and maybe it's not even just your manager, maybe it's someone else who's at your level, maybe it's someone who's a manager of a different team, but being able to build those relationships early on and figure out, who is someone who, I know allies are talked about a lot, and I like the term advocate instead, because it's like, I'm not just standing by your side saying like, go you, like I'm advocating on your behalf, which I think is really important in situations like that. So finding those people early are helpful. I think, when, especially if you're in the meeting with that person, and if they know, okay, like, hey, I tell them I've often tried to get a word in meetings and I've had a hard time. So like, I would love your support there. And so maybe they'll see me trying to say something, I'm being talked over. And then, Jeremy, let's say you're my advocate. You might say, hey, Danielle was actually trying to share an idea here. Danielle, can you share that again? And have them then speak for you. I think, you can also do this on behalf of other people and try to just create that culture within the meeting. So maybe I am someone who's often spoken over, but I see, Jeremy, like someone else is talking over you, and I'm going to say, oh, wait, I feel like Jeremy was trying to get a word in. Jeremy, can we hear from you? And, I think modeling the type of behavior you want to see can be a good way to help make other people aware and want to change it. So there's a bunch of different little techniques that you can do, and depending on the situation. So like, I'm in a meeting and I'm being spoken over or not being heard. It's, having other advocates, being starting to create the culture for others. There, you can, go back after the person's interrupted you and say, I actually wasn't done speaking, and then continue to share what you share. So yeah, a couple different approaches. I think some that are more bold, and some that are, just still trying to make sure you're heard without, then speaking over the other person and saying, actually, Jeremy, I'm still talking, right? There's different ways to approach it.
I haven't finished yet. Why are you talking? Yeah. I love that. That's I've been in so many meetings over the course of my 20 some odd years in the professional world, where that is just, it happens so often. And, now it's a little bit easier. I don't want to say easier, different being remote, where, you could put your hand up on Zoom or whatever, or you can interject, and it's a little quieter, but then it also at the same time can get really hard when everybody's talking. I've been on Zoom calls where it's even worse than it was in person, because people are just talking and, nobody can even see that someone else is trying to talk, it's hard. It depends on the team that you're on, I guess. But one of the things I am kind of curious about is, in this remote world now, where tons of teams are remote, visibility often, helps get you seen and everything else, raises promotion and all that. I'm curious, biases that you've kind of come across in the last couple of years since COVID, when we've been more remote, that have maybe impacted people, one group of people more than others. Is that something you've kind of experienced? Is that something you've been thinking about?
Yeah, that's a good question. I remember actually reading a lot about this earlier on when we all moved remote. There was an article, I think it was in the New York Times, about how like remote meetings are thought to be like, people thought they were going to be the great equalizer, and sometimes just made situations even worse, because if I don't actually know if this is still the case, but like, if mics are picking up differently, This is, oh gosh, now I'm getting distracted on the tangent. Just thinking about mics and actually how initially with the microphone, women's voices were not picked up when microphones were first invented, because
Really?
they were
Oh,
like
wow. I
designed
didn't know that.
specifically to, like help amplify men's voices. And there's some research pointing to like that might be why we don't like the sound of women's voices. We as a society, quote unquote, don't like the sound of women's voices because initially were designed for men's voices. Anyway, that was
I
that
didn't
was
know
an
that.
aside
That's
of,
fascinating.
who, I mean, and because part of it too, and I don't actually know which mics get picked up more, but when we're talking on a remote call, you don't hear multiple voices at once. And so like some of those are going to get picked up over others. And so might be, harder to be heard if people are interrupting you or again trying to get a word in. I also think that people have different communication styles, and I think that it's so easy to schedule a Zoom meeting or a remote meeting that there's not necessarily the intention that's put into, oh, we're taking up people's time, and like I want to be really intentional about how I'm designing this and setting this up. And so, there you might have a meeting put on without an agenda or
Hmm.
without clear goals. And that can be really hard for someone to say, like, okay, well, I don't know how I'm supposed to contribute in this meeting or how I can prepare for this meeting. And this isn't just women, right? I'm just talking about anyone in general.
Hmm.
I think like accessibility is another piece of it. There are captions. And so, if someone needs captioning, I think folks might think like, oh, well, they're good. Like there's captions, but they're imperfect. And I think that can also be a barrier for folks who are participating that, might be
Yeah.
hard of hearing or deaf. So yeah, I don't have as much like research or insight into the specific challenges for remote, but they're still
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I wonder if anybody's doing that. It seems like there's got to be a team somewhere doing that. But I think about too, cameras, turning your cameras on.
Mm.
Generally speaking, obviously, like a man can just like get right out of bed, throw a hat on, and turn the camera on. A lot of women are not going to want to do that, right? They're not going to want to just turn the camera on. I used to work with a woman who was Muslim and had a headscarf, and so if she didn't have the headscarf on, she wouldn't turn her camera on. And I actually had another colleague, a man, be like, I've never seen her face. Just like passing comments like that. It's like, well,
Mm-mm.
because she's Muslim and she doesn't want to put that thing, it's like,
Mm.
anyway, so there's all those like I think like even too when I've heard so many times like and it's a lot of times executives, cis white men, turn the camera on, everybody put your camera on, I can't see your face, where's everybody, and like stuff like that. And then there's that one person that doesn't have it on, and they'll, you know what I mean, and they feel like they're the odd person out, and it's little things like that that I feel like as a leader, read the room, you know, and know who's on the call. And a lot of people just don't do that.
Yeah, it's
I don't
it's
know. It's
hard. I
frustrating.
think that
Yeah.
they're like, oh, what's your like?
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know that that advice really applies to everyone, and I think
Yeah.
that's
You'll get a standing ovation every time.
that's something we really tried to put in the Present Yourself book. Is this idea that like not advice is not going to work the same for everyone. And one of the things that we did was
Hmm.
we invited 11 different contributors to share their stories and their advice. And they don't, sometimes they're like, I want to say like contradictory, but like sometimes it's this a similar type of thing, and there's two different perspectives of it because they're showing up to these stories with different backgrounds and experiences and identities. And so I think that that is really important when getting advice about the workplace, is being able to hear from folks who have had similar experiences that you have and similar backgrounds, because um, you know they've been there and can share what that was like.
Yeah, that's awesome advice. I think it is like very context specific. The number of people, the size of the team, where they are, how many important people are on these teams versus like individual contributors or something. I think it all plays a huge role in this. I want to dig a little bit further into what we started the conversation off with, which is about this, understanding your own limitations versus, I don't want to call it imposter syndrome, but understanding your own personal limitations versus like the system or the institutional type biases that might be like forcing you to think this way or getting you to think that way. I'm curious, is there something that like a process or a series of framework or something that somebody can go through and maybe ask themselves, like, is it to figure out, is this me? Do I need to actually like improve my skill set, or is this something larger than me that actually is keeping me down or keeping me from excelling?
Yeah, I think that that is a good question. One thing that initially comes to mind is like, is this a skill set or is this a personality trait, right? Like, I don't think
Mm,
of voice being a skill set. Like, yes, maybe vocal production coaches would disagree with me because there's ways that you can use your voice, but like, how your voice sounds is not a like workable skill. Whereas, when
right.
you deliver your presentation, having a call to action at the end of it, like that, great. Like that's super
Hmm.
actionable. That's something that I can do. And so considering like, is this a piece of feedback that I'm getting that feels more part of my identity or who I am or a trait, or is this something that is a skill that can be improved? I think that's one lens of approaching it. I think also having your manager to be able to do a check with, and maybe not even at your company. I think
Hmm.
joining different groups and communities where you can just get that other check of like, is this just me? Is this, has anyone else heard this before? I think there's a lot of really amazing communities. There's, within UX, there's Ladies That UX has a lot of local chapters
Hmm.
all over. I'm thinking, I know a lot of specifically women's ones because of who we work with, but there's tech
Yeah,
ladies,
yeah.
ladies get paid. And there's other groups that aren't just specifically for women. I know that there are some specifically for career transitioners, but having just that community or that group to be able to help like, how can I think about this outside of just myself and how I'm feeling in this moment?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the thing I heard you say too is finding, sponsors or
Mhm.
allies or mentors or something like that to kind of talk through some of these problems, and someone who has more experience, who's been there, that can say, no, that is definitely not you, or yeah, I think you might need to work on this thing. I think that's such an important. I heard. I know we talked about allies. I heard recently someone say sponsor, like finding a
Hmm.
sponsor, somebody who's willing to kind of speak up for you and advocate for you.
Yeah.
Advocate when you're not around. One of the things that I'm kind of curious about is like junior designers, especially, they get to a company, they often think like, oh, I'm done networking. I got the job. I don't need to
Mm-mm.
network. But that role of internal networking, can you speak a little bit, and maybe this is even external networking too. Can you speak a little bit to, we talked about the role of in a specific, a role of a sponsor in a specific setting like a meeting, but can you talk a little bit more to how sponsors or allies or advocates or mentors can help here? Is that
Yeah.
something that you've seen?
Yeah. I mean, I very much appreciate what you just said of like your networking doesn't stop when you get the job. And actually, I think when you first start a company, it's such a great excuse to reach out to as many people you can that work there because it's, you have that I'm
Mm,
new, I'm starting, I want to learn, I want to grow. I think you can do it at any point when you're working at a company, but that's a great excuse when you're first getting started.
yeah.
Um, and, I don't think that you necessarily need to go to someone and say like, hey, Jeremy, will you be my mentor? Or like, will you be my
Be my
advocate?
mentor.
But it's about building relationships in the workplace. So
Hmm.
especially I think folks who, as you're starting to just meet as many people as possible in the workplace, you might see, okay, who do I feel like I have a good rapport with? Who is someone who has maybe had a similar experience or background that I do that I feel like I might be able to relate to some of the challenges or questions that I might have and continue to follow up with them and check in. And you might even ask, like, as I'm new here and, as I'm continuing to learn, like, is it okay if, I check in with you every once in a while, or can we like, set up a meeting once a month to check in or whatever
Hmm.
that might be. So, I mean, you could say, will you be my mentor? But I don't know. I don't know enough about how people respond to that. I think I know all the mentors I
Yeah.
have been a little bit more in informal capacities. And
Yeah.
then also, yeah, outside of your specific company, I think is also really important. Like those people that you were talking to as you were job searching, follow up with them, let
Hmm.
them keep them updated of where, you landed and what you're thinking about and, sharing journey with them, asking them questions about themselves. People love to talk about themselves. So I think that, it's important to maintain those relationships even once you're in a job.
Yeah. And when I think about this whole, like, is it me or is it the system? Something that I think is worth noting is those people, especially if they've been in the company for a long time. I don't know if this is a bias. This is probably a bias, but they get used to whatever idiosyncrasies, either good or bad of that company. They just kind of assume that that's the way it is. And, it's just our company, whatever. And if you get an outside perspective, they're like, they did what? Why would they do that? It makes no sense. No one else does that. That's like crazy. So, I think there's an opportunity to have like a both internal, and external to get a different perspective, because those people that have, especially the veterans at 20, like last place I worked, they had people that were there for 25 years.
Yeah.
There were some people that's its only place they've ever worked was that one company, and they don't know what it's like outside. And so I think that's an important perspective to get to, is to sort of compare and contrast. Like, is this normal? Should we be doing it this way? Or is this something that we're just, screwed? I don't know.
Yeah. And, I know earlier when we were talking about like biases and them being systemic, it's like there are biases that exist in our society. There are biases that might exist within certain cultures. There are biases that might exist within your company. And so, and then there's like just harassment that might happen. That is like, someone who is just harming you, and not, not necessarily like has some, I don't know, there's bias initially, but doesn't make it okay. And so, yes, I agree. I think having that outside check can be really helpful.
Yeah. One other thing too, with this internal networking, I think this is something that a lot of people, especially designers, they think like, I'm just going to stay in my lane, design my thing. But something that I think is super valuable with just internal networking outside of your core team is being connected to all the other people that are doing other things that your team's not doing, and being able to put your ear to the ground and make those connections. And when we think about some of these, biases in some of these meetings, and when you speak up and you can say, hey, did you know that this other team is doing this thing and it's not the same way we're doing it? Like, maybe we should talk, or they're already building that. Why are we trying to do it again? Or, hey, that thing, we could use that and that could help us. That adds a lot of credibility, I think, to especially a junior designer who otherwise probably wouldn't have that kind of insight. And having those conversations internally, it adds a lot of credibility to you to be able to solve problems and connect dots and all those other things. I think that's something a lot of junior designers never really think about.
Yeah.
But that's something I advocate for all the time, is like, talk to everybody, because beyond the mentorship stuff, like it'll just help you connect dots, grow your career, all that stuff. So anyway, that's just something I think's worth calling out.
I think that's a great point. And to what you mentioned before about the challenges with being remote, is I don't think that stuff happens as naturally. So like, when I worked at my last company and we were in an office, I would walk by the legal team and like, I, developed a relationship with them. And so doesn't mean that it can't happen remotely. You just have to be more intentional about, if there's Slack channels that involve other groups hanging out in those spaces, or specifically asking for someone to have a virtual coffee date, or think it is as easy when you're not in the same place.
Yeah.
Even though there are a lot of benefits to being remote.
Yeah, this is I'm
pro remote working. It is a challenge. Yeah.
I know. I miss the water cooler chat. I actually have this anecdote I tell people all the time, but like I was in the break room at my old office. This was before COVID. And I was eating lunch. I was by myself, like reading a book. I don't remember what I was doing. Sitting by myself. And then the table next to me were two different developers from my team. And they were debating about the users or something in the app we were building. And both of them were totally wrong. Like, neither one of them was right at all. Like, completely wrong understanding of what we were building, why we were building, and all this stuff. And I was like, oh my God, we've got a problem. And then we did this survey thing. We found out like 86% of our engineers had no idea what the users were doing in the tool, which is a huge problem, I think. So anyway, I just think about this. If we were remote, I would have never heard that conversation. Like, that would have never been something I would have overheard, because it would have been in a DM somewhere, And I don't know, there's just so much value to that. But then again, I love sitting on my couch in my slippers. I got my slippers on right now. I'm like just hanging out. Yeah. Anyway, being able to drop in, but I love that stuff. So, last thing I want to talk about, we've been talking for a little while. I know I got to get you out of here. You probably got some stuff you got to run to. But one of the things I want to talk about, as people listening to this, maybe, cis white dudes that don't feel like they're being affected a lot by these biases, but they could be allies, they could be sponsors and help. What advice do you have for people listening to help with this situation and improve their workplace or conferences or whatever it is that they may have opportunities to help influence?
Yeah, we spent a lot of, I'm glad you asked that, first of all. And we spent a lot of the past 6 years with Women Talk Design working to give the tools and the information to women and non-binary folks to say, this could be happening to you. It's good to be aware of it. And here's what you can continue to do to have your voice heard. You deserve to be, this sucks, but you still deserve to be heard and speak up. More recently, actually in one of our workshops, I had someone who said, I shared some of this research about these biases with my manager, who's a man, and he was so surprised. And he was like, why aren't I hearing more about this? And so it led us actually to develop a presentation called So What Can I Do? Amplifying the voices of women and non-binary folks. And as part of that, there are kind of these 4 steps that we recommend. And it's always so hard because I feel like this stuff is not a checklist. It's about awareness and continuing to learn and grow. But I think that these general actions you can do and I'm doing this cyclical motion with my hand. It's an ongoing journey. But I think first and foremost is to get curious, to say okay, I know that there are biases that might happen that I don't experience because of my identity, and I want to learn more about them. And so seek out articles and resources. I mentioned the article by Jodi Anbury and Ruchika Tolshan, Stop Telling Women They Have Imposter Syndrome. You can check out the Women in the Workplace McKinsey report they put out with Lean In every year. It talks a lot about women's experience in the workplace. Amazing leadership coach who talks both about supporting leaders, but also some of the biases that come up. Vivian Costello, thinking about folks specifically in the design world. So get curious is one. I think the next thing is making space. So taking actions to actually carve out the space for folks to be heard who might not otherwise. Amplifying their voices. So when you're in the meeting, making sure okay, let's get Jeremy's idea across, and that's not going to be by me saying it, but it's calling on Jeremy to share his idea. And then listen to what folks who are experiencing these biases face. And if someone is speaking up or trying to share their idea, to actually listen to it and then go back into the cycle of continuing to get curious and learn. So those are my 4 pieces of advice: is get curious, make space, amplify, listen, and then continue to do it all over again.
Yeah, I think the worst thing that you could do is explain it away and just say, oh, it's not happening. Oh, I don't see it, so it mustn't be true. And I think this is something that I've definitely been guilty of in the past, and it's taken me a long time, and help that I married a feminist. And she very much reinforces this all the time for me. But, just because you don't see it happening does not mean it is not happening to other people, And I think recognizing the privilege that you have as a cis white man, call it woke, call it whatever the hell you want, I don't care. But, it is a fact that certain people are privileged and can do certain things that other people simply cannot do or can't do easily or as easily as we might be able to do. And I think that's for me, I don't know, that's been a huge part of it, is just, I might not see it. Doesn't mean it is not happening.
Yeah.
So
I know that, and I appreciate that. And I know that you keep talking about being a man. I'm a cis straight white woman, and there are a lot of biases that I don't specifically face, and or things that haven't happened to me. And I've spent a lot of time having conversations with folks from all different backgrounds, from reading their work, attending training, so that I could better understand this. And I'm still learning all the time. So I think carving out the time to learn about others' experiences is really important.
Absolutely. Yeah. And some other things too, I think is just worth noting. And this is something just speaking about LinkedIn, because I'm on LinkedIn probably way too much than I should be, but I see a lot of people, follow this person, follow this group of people. And so many times people are called out you're just a bunch of white dudes. Where's everybody else? And I think it's just worth noting, if you're going to do that stuff, you just because, and the excuse I hear a lot, and they get really defensive, and it's well, this is just who I follow. This is what I know. It's that's the problem, isn't it? Like, couldn't you find 2 or 3 women or minorities or somebody? They exist. Just because you don't know them doesn't mean they don't exist. Maybe you should, try. And you could blame the algorithm too. I'm sure there's probably something there. I'm sure that's like promoting certain voices over others. But anyway, I don't know. It's just something worth calling out. I think it's just like,
oh yeah,
I see that a lot, getting really defensive.
For sure. Yeah. I think like this is part of the get curious of what I was sharing before, is like seeking out hearing from other people. And I also, this is something we shared in the book, is being really intentional about who you are citing or referencing. I realized earlier, like I talked about Adam Grant. He's a white man. He has a lot of really great resources out there. Also really wanted to give like the credit and flowers to Ruchika Tulshan and Jodi Embury, who are 2 women of color who are writing about this work as well. And I think that it's really important paying attention to who you're listening to, who you're citing, because that's also helping amplify who is seen as an expert in these different topics. And it's just like a perpetual cycle.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, that's something that I'm glad you brought up, and I really want people to pay attention to, is like, who are you listening to? Who are the books that you're reading? Who are the people that you're citing in your presentations? Because that's ultimately helping reinforce or change the system.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just like, I think as an example for anybody out there, like as something a white dude could do, this is something I do. One, I wanted to have you on the show to talk about this. I think that's something, honestly, I'll be honest, I felt a little awkward. It's like, I'm a white dude talking about like biases and stuff, and I'm like part of the problem, I guess. And like, but then I'm like, but if I don't talk about it, like nobody's going to hear it. So, I think that's a really good example. Something else that I also do is I turned off on LinkedIn. I didn't turn it off. I don't go to the home feed anymore. I like click the little bell on people, and I use my notifications as like my home feed. So I actually see like only the people that I want to see. And I realize like that is an echo chamber, because that only becomes like the people that I want to see, that I've specifically said show me their posts. So I have made it a point now to like go out and find. I've almost done like an audit of who I follow, like looking at like, not even just white dudes. It's like American white dudes, like North American white dudes, it's like, there's nobody from Europe. There's like, so like I'm going in, I'm like, I don't have anyone from Asia. I don't have anyone from South Asia. I don't have anyone from Europe or Africa or wherever, and I think that's like something really, was just like you said, be curious. And I think that's like a good example. A lot of people just like let the algorithm show them who they're going to, learn from. And let's be real, a lot of people are learning from the algorithm and Twitter and TikTok and Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn, even all these places. They're seeing these content creators that are creating a lot of times really great content, but it is, often the same the same people. So anyway, I think that's just maybe something I've kind of seen, and I think it's worth calling out. So,
yeah, for sure.
Anyway.
Yeah. Awesome. I'm glad you brought that up.
So before we get out of here, I've got 5 questions that I like to ask all my guests to help my listeners get to know our guests a little bit better. But before we do that, give yourself a plug one more time, the book, the course, all that stuff, and tell us where we can find you.
So Present Yourself is the name of the book, name of the course. If you go to womentalkdesign.com/book, womentalkdesign.com/present yourself, you can access either of those. The course runs a couple times a year. It's completely remote. And the book is coming out March 2024. And the piece that I really want to highlight about both of these, actually, talking about following folks that, might have a different background or perspective from you as you do. There are guest speakers, guest contributors in both of these who, live in different countries around the world, who have different backgrounds, different identities, and are awesome people to follow. And so I hope you all will check it out. And really, I think we didn't spend as much time talking about this, but something I want to emphasize is that I truly, truly believe that everyone's voice needs to be heard. And I think that this is something that when you're starting off in a career, thinking about like folks that are new to UX might think like, I don't have anything to share yet. And I disagree. And that is something that is in the book, it's something that is in the course, is that regardless of where you are in your career, you have something to share. And I hope that even if you don't read the book or take one of those programs, you know that, and dig in and start to share your ideas and your stories.
Love that. Yeah, that's such a great thing to call out too, because like you might be saying, well, I just graduated. What do I know? Well, there's somebody like that's about to graduate that would love your opinion. I just started school. There's somebody who's looking to start a school and would love your opinion on, what it was like, whatever it is. I mean, there's always somebody behind you that, you might not be able to give them management advice or advice on how to do whatever because you haven't done it yet. But there's somebody that's behind you that would love that advice. I think that's great calling out. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
All right. First up, what is your favorite non-design book?
Oh, goodness. I'm like very biased because I'm looking at a bunch of books right near me. I have a lot of them. What is my favorite? I love a memoir and I love personal stories. And so I'm going to give a plug for this one right now. I don't know that it's my favorite. I'm going to give a plug for it. It's called Hungry Hearts, and it is short essays curated by Jennifer Rudolph Walsh, and personal essays from a really diverse group of people talking about, what it means to be human.
All right, awesome. Yeah, that sounds really good. I'd have to check that. What was the name of it again?
It's called Hungry Hearts, and it was curated by Jennifer Rudolph Walsh. Yeah, I think one of the ways that I feel like I have learned more and more about people who have different backgrounds or identities than I do are reading their personal stories. And so like this, Chanel Miller's Know My Name, what is it? Disability Visibility. That was, I'm blinking. I can send you a link to it to put in show notes if you have those. But I just think, I think that's such a great way to learn about other people. Yeah, I love memoirs.
Yeah, I agree. What better way to hear it directly from them?
Mm-hmm.
All right. What is your favorite non-design podcast?
I listen pretty religiously to We Can Do Hard Things. It's a podcast by Glennon Doyle and Addie Wambach and Amanda Doyle. Yeah. So good.
Yeah, my wife got me turned on to that actually, and that was a good one. That was something that we tried to instill in our kids. Now it's like I can't do blah, 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 I can't tie my shoe. Like you can do hard things.
You can do hard things. Yeah, and they also do such a.
Yeah,
Sorry, I was just going to say they also do such a great job of bringing in a bunch of different guests, and I've learned about so many people, and I've bought their books and read from them, and so they talk about just tough topics that a lot of us face.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's funny because I tell my kids that and then I'm like themselves I complain about stuff all the time too. I'm like I can do hard things. Yeah. You can tie your shoes. I can do this.
It's a good reminder.
Right. What is your favorite? Yeah, exactly. We all need it every once in a while. What is your favorite meal? This could be something you've cooked, something your grandma used to cook, something you had at a restaurant somewhere. Favorite meal?
Something that some of our friends have been doing recently, we have this cookbook by Ottolenghi. It's his last name. He's a chef. And what we've done is Ottolenghi meals. So we all cook something from his cookbook. And it's, I don't even know if it's like Mediterranean, Middle Eastern, kind of inspired type of foods, lots of veggies, lots of herbs. And I think it's both like the food itself is delicious, but also the meal itself is like the community. It's all of us coming together. Yeah.
That's part of it. That is part of it. It's not always about the food. That's why I say meal and not food.
I know. When you said that, I was like, I was originally thinking food. I have to correct this now. Yeah.
Actually, I asked somebody one time and they said breakfast. I was like, okay, fair enough. That's all right. You like breakfast.
I do like
favorite
breakfast.
meal of the day. All right.
Yeah.
But no, yeah, that's that's the experience of it. I mean, that's it's interesting because when we think about UX design, and I think there's so many parallels between like the restaurant industry and software industry, or I guess you might call it the service industry that's delivering the software, right? Not service industry in restaurants, but Airbnb, for instance. It's about the experience, right? And it's about like the context, and it's about where you experience that interface, and so many designers, we just assume like, oh, I'm designing the app and the button is on the left and it's beautiful and there's perfect UX, but like, the experience matters. So yeah, the overall experience. So anyway, I don't know. Yeah. I love that. That's
and I actually want to add on that note, and this is especially because there's a lot of folks that are entering the industry listening to this, is that you can use your design skills for so many things. And this is like when
Yeah.
we teach public speaking and presentation skills, we use a design framework. And you don't have to be a designer to use it, but I've had a lot of
Hmm.
designers who are like, oh, I use this process of understanding my context and my constraints and
Yeah.
who's the end user for this and what experience I want them to have. Like those are all things I'm doing in my job. And I don't think about that when I'm preparing a presentation at work or going to speak at a meetup. But you can apply those things. So I want to give
I
a little
love that.
plug
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
tapping into the knowledge that you have.
I'm with you. I love that. Yeah, the context is key, and that make or break anything, really. What is your favorite vacation spot?
Recently, it has been going to see my family. I live in California. My whole family is in Florida. I grew up in Florida. I didn't love living there, but now going to see my niece and my nephew and my family there. It's just, yeah. I think they would give
Yeah.
me a really hard time versus being like, "This is your favorite vacation spot. Come live here." But now that I don't live there, it has become.
I was gonna say I love to visit Florida. I don't want to live in Florida. I want to stay in Florida
Yes.
not longer than a couple of weeks. What part of Florida? Where do they live?
Like Fort Lauderdale area,
If you don't
South
mind me
Florida.
saying.
Yeah, so they're
Oh,
they're
cool. Okay.
my
Yeah, that's
brother's
beautiful
house is
down there.
close enough to the beach, so it's always nice to go there. And they're definitely the family that when I'm there,
Yeah.
they help take care of things. They, are watching my daughter cooking me
There you go.
meals. It's great.
I love that. Right. That's the best kind of. That's why you like it so much. That's
Yeah,
you got a
again,
built-in
it's the full
babysitter. I love
experience.
that.
It's not just the place. Yeah.
Yeah, I used to go. I had a friend who lived down in Fort Lauderdale, and this has been like 20 something years. This was like 2001, I think. We went down there to Hollywood Beach, and I don't know
Mhm.
what it's like now. 20 years ago, it was like just little small low-rise motels on the beach. Like now, and who knows? 20 years later, it's probably like giant high-rise condos. But it just felt like a very like retro kind of vibe, like just very low key.
Mhm.
It wasn't like Miami with like super crowded or anything like that. But
Yeah.
Hollywood Beach was awesome. I don't know. I haven't been there in forever.
I
Who
haven't
knows?
been to
Maybe
Hollywood
I'll
Beach
totally
actually in
forget.
a long time either. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, report back next time you go. Let me
Okay,
know what it's
I
like.
will.
All right. Last question. What is your favorite design tool that is not Figma? Everybody loves Figma. Got it when it's not.
Post-its.
There he is. Sticky notes?
I love the
Post-it
sticky
notes.
notes, the physical sticky notes. They're all over my office. I like digital tools as well, but I think starting with
Yeah.
sticky notes and a Sharpie is always does it for
There you
me.
go. I made the mistake of buying these sticky notes.
Oh
Like you
yeah.
can't see at home, but
They're
the accordion
accordion.
ones. So like every time I write, I gotta flip it around, and it's like it looks cool when I guess the design of it, but I'm like, who thought that was a good idea? I
They
gotta like
also
flip it around. The experience of using these are terrible.
Yeah, yeah. Also, if you like just try to grab one off rather than like the whole thing just falls. Yeah. It's
The whole thing, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what happens. Like, look, see, you just did it. It
yeah.
took two or three off.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love a good sticky note. What I miss the most about work is like a whiteboard, like a big, not even a whiteboard, just a big space, like a wall where I could like
Mhm.
put stuff on like sticky notes and stuff. I have like nowhere to do that now in my house. And I miss that. It's like one thing I miss.
Yeah.
Whiteboards and like a place to actually put sticky notes.
Yeah, I know. That's
Now I just
you
use
can
them
do
and
one place to put
I
them.
just have stacks of sticky notes all over my desk. It's just
Same.
I don't know.
Guiltily
Yeah,
same.
anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, right on. All right, Danielle. Well, this was awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate this. Everybody out there, like it might not be you. It could be the system that you're in, keeping you down. Make sure you find those biases, see what you can do to mitigate them. And if you feel like you're empowered and you have some privilege and you can change some stuff, do not be afraid to get in there and make some change. It's great talking to you, Danielle. Thank you so much
Thank
for coming
you.
on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Jeremy.